was a German national, would have been a German national, but would not have been interested in taking out citizenship papers. You have to realize during this time, the interwar years in Germany goes through the defeat of World War I. There's the Red Revolution of 1918. You know, the communist struggles. You have the economic hardships. You have a little bit of recovery, but then when you have the 1929 Great Depression disaster, that kind of plummets them back into an economic disaster again. So there's a lot of issues going on with what's going on in Germany. You had a lot of individuals that came over to the United States, wanted to get economically secure back on their feet, but always intended to go back to Germany, never intended to stay here. So those individuals would have been in the German Bund. The American-German Bund, or the German-American Bund rather, would have been for individuals that were American citizens or in the process of taking out their citizenship. If they had made the application but hadn't gone through the process yet, they would be allowed to be in the German-American Bund. And if you look at this photo, this is a picture from a parade. You can see the band in the front, the flag, you have both the American flag, the Nazi flag, and in the middle you have the German-American Bund flag, which we'll look at a little bit closer in a second. But this is Madison Avenue in New York City. There's probably a couple hundred to 1,000 people, spectators watching. This was not hidden. This was in the newspapers. They were out. They were proud about what they represented, about their ideology. They wanted to spread a positive image of Nazi Germany, and that's what they did. This was not something that was in the shadows or lurking in the background that we didn't know about. This was wide out in the open, and they had no qualms about marching down a main street in New York City. Just to give you a little visual of what we just talked about, Teutonia Society starts in 1924. It's 4 locals: Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, and Rochester. It basically starts in the Midwest and a little bit in the East. By 1933, the Friends of the New Germany has about tripled in size. We have now 20 locals. And you can see, if you look at that list, you have in our area, Clifton, you have Newark, Passaic, Union City would have been Hudson County, had a heavy German population, Long Island, Hoboken. So this was very much a group that was in our area. The national headquarters would have been in New York City. And as Rich had said earlier, there were camps in New York, New Jersey, and Long Island. So you definitely had a lot of activity in our area. And by 1936, it's almost again doubled, and we're up to 50 locals throughout the United States. Anywhere you would have had a German population, you would have been likely to find a Bund unit. So as far as flags go, the upper left flag, you have the swastika rising out of the AV, which would have been American Deutscher Volksbund, which would have been the German-American Bund. You have the blue flag with the gear and the D in it, would have been an auxiliary or subsidiary unit of the Bund. It still would have been under the Bund organization, but this was more of like a business league. It would have been like their businesses or would have been involved in this, and they had like frequent shopper programs to kind of drive business to Bund shop owners. And then at the bottom, you have the single S rune, just like the SS. You have the single S rune, which would have been used in Germany for the Hitler Youth, and the same thing here for the German-American Bund Youth would have been used for the youth units in the United States. Again, the uniforms, they're taking their cue right from Nazi Germany. They're taking basically a very similar, if not exact, uniform to the Hitler Youth with the neckerchief and the brown shirt. The only difference would have been the collar tabs and maybe some of the insignia that would have indicated that it was a United States-based unit versus a German-based unit. As I mentioned earlier, they took their structure, organization, terminology, ideology right from Germany. Hitler was the leader of Nazi Germany. He was their Führer. The leader of the German-American Bund would have been called the Bundesführer, the leader of the Bund. So again, their terminology is coming right from Germany. They had a uniformed stormtrooper division. They were called the Ordnungsdienst, the OD. The OD was actually a necessary unit that they had to have. These rallies and meetings that they had were often publicized, open to the public. And not only did supporters come to these meetings, but protesters would come to these meetings. You had Jewish war veterans, you had VFW members who may have not liked the fact that these National Socialists were organizing and holding rallies in Newark or Brooklyn or New York City. And they would go there to disrupt the meetings, to disrupt the rallies, and to try and, sometimes there'd be all out brawls and fights. You could read some of the old newspaper accounts and there would be actually fights in the street stemming out of these meetings. There's a good book if you're interested in looking up books. There's a good book called Nazis in Newark, and that is about the Jewish gangsters like Meyer Lansky and his protege, who would have been specifically targeting the Bund for their anti-Semitic views. And they would have specifically, if they saw Bund members on the street or a rally, they would have specifically tried to disrupt these rallies. So these uniformed stormtroopers were not just for show, they actually were there for some type of protection. You had the Bund Youth, which would have been modeled after the Hitler Youth, like I already spoke about. And if you see this screenshot from an FBI file, you can see some of the camps that were spread across the United States, these summer camps that the Bund operated. And again, mostly the Northeast, the Midwest, and the Western California area. You have a little bit in like Arizona, or not Arizona, but Colorado. But it's really not in the South. We don't have a lot of concentrated German population in the South, so you really didn't have units there. Although you might have some smaller groups in those areas. These summer camps would have drills, rifle shooting. The press picked up on the rifle shooting a lot. Honestly, if you kind of compare it to what the Boy Scouts were doing at the time, at their summer camps, it's rifle practice, target practice. There really wasn't much difference, but because these were National Socialists and they really weren't politically correct when we were kind of allies with the British, the press kind of picked up on this and said, oh, look at these Germans, here they are practicing for armed revolution, so to speak. But you had the youth organizations, you had camping, sports, were played, and you had obviously the rallies. Again, just to kind of see the organization, you had an Eastern department, a Middle department, and a Western department. Each department had its own leader and subunits, which would have gone right down to the county or local city level. And then on the national executive level, you would have had executive committee and the leader up there. Just again, just to point out how local, in fact, this was. The leader of the Eastern Department of the German American Bund lived in Cliffside Park. The leader, the National Executive Committee National Secretary lived in Haledon. And these were all local to northern New Jersey and to New York City area. So this was definitely something happening right in our own backyard. Their aims and purposes were to promote a positive view of Nazi Germany. They disseminated Nazi propaganda. Everyone knows, the Nazis were masters at propaganda. They really kind of, brought it down to a science. And similar today, if you were walking down Manhattan on a street corner and somebody might hand you a Jehovah's Witness or a Latter-day Saints pamphlet, you may be handed a pamphlet about Nazi Germany, about their struggles in Europe. So they would hand out that type of propaganda. You would also have them, again, influencing American politics and foreign policy, but definitely not involved. They never ran their own candidates. They never ran for election or anything like that. But if you had a particular candidate that maybe was pro-German or anti-British or had a particular view that would be helpful to the German cause, that would be a candidate that they would go and support. As far as Kristallnacht in Germany, you had Kristallnacht and then the boycott of the Jewish shops in Germany. Well, you had a counter boycott here in the United States. There was a Jewish attorney by the name of Samuel Untermeyer who basically did an economic boycott of German stores and businesses here in the United States. The only problem with that is you may have individuals like myself who had my great-grandparents immigrated here in 1899 and 1901 prior to World War I, had nothing to do with National Socialism, had nothing to do with the Third Reich, and if they had a store, they may be caught up in this anti-German boycott. So unfortunately, it kind of had, it was kind of a double-edged sword. In one sense, you're helping by, boycotting maybe Bund supporting stores. But the second time, the Bund did have this organization that was like a business league. And if I'm being hurt by this Jewish boycott, even if I have nothing to do with the Bund, I may join the Bund strictly for the economic benefits that it may provide me by driving business my way. So not everyone that was in the Bund or associated with the Bund was necessarily an ardent National Socialist or Nazi in the making. They also had a German newspaper that they put out that was in German and English, and they had about 25,000 dues-paying members. I've seen estimates up to 100,000, as low as 10,000, but most historians agree it's probably around 25,000 to 35,000. There really was no specific book where you might have somebody who's very affluent or very influential, and they really can't publicly associate with the Bund, but they may have supported the Bund. Somebody like Charles Lindbergh or Henry Ford were, prior to the war, supportive of some of the stuff that the Nazis and Hitler were doing. Obviously, once the war started, they didn't continue to support it, but you may have had some individuals that were loosely associated or in favor of what the Bund was doing, but may not have been a member of it out and out. Again, I talked about what was going on in Nazi, the boycott of the Jewish shops, and we had the same thing coming back this way. This would have been boycott German industry, don't buy German goods. And again, it had the kind of that double-edged sword where it would drive maybe a German business owner that wasn't in favor of the Bund into their arms, so to speak. So what the Nazi or what the Bund did is they would have rallies and economic incentives to visit German stores, and they tried to fight the boycott themselves. So you had this, so to speak, this little battle going back between the boycotts in Germany and here. So talking about the camps, if anyone is familiar with Yaphank, Long Island, out in it's in Suffolk County, and it's in the middle of the island. There is a little village called Yaphank. It still exists today, and inside that village is a private German community. About 10 years ago, it was in the newspaper because they had a rule on their association books that said if you sold your house, you could only sell it to an individual of German descent. It went to the Supreme Court. They said that was unconstitutional. You couldn't do that anymore. So if you look them up, you'll be able to find that. At the time, they were called the German American Settlement League. That name has since changed. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but that German American Settlement League, that private community, is the remnants of what was Camp Siegfried of the German American Bund on Long Island. The houses for Camp Siegfried, the community field for Camp Siegfried are all there today, just part of this private community. It is a private community. You cannot just drive in and drive around. I personally have not been there. This is a map from the late 1930s of what was called at that point in time German Gardens, which became Camp Siegfried. I'm pretty sure the street names have been changed. I don't think they still have Adolf Hitler Street. I don't think they have Hermann Goering Street anymore. But again, this is just something that I bring up because this was right out in the open. They actually had a street named Adolf Hitler Street. They had houses with inlaid stone swastikas above the doorway. They had houses and yards with a very intricately laid hedgerow of bushes laid out in the shape of a swastika. So this in no way, shape, or form was surreptitiously going on in the shadows, behind everyone's back. This was wide out in the open, and they were proud of what they stood for. This would have been a picture of Camp Siegfried back in the 1930s. Again, you see the uniformed OD marching through a large crowd of supporters. And again, it is a large crowd. They would get hundreds, if not thousands, of supporters throughout the weekends throughout the summer. In New Jersey, Camp Nordland was in Andover. It was the largest Nazi Bund camp in the United States. And if anyone is familiar with Andover, New Jersey, if you know where the police department is, it's right across the street from Lake Iliff Park. Lake Iliff Park is basically what Camp Siegfried or what Camp Nordland was. Camp Nordland became Iliff Park. If you see on this picture, the house in the background, that is roughly about where the police station is now. And in the center of the background, the White House with the flags on it, the swastika flags, that was the clubhouse for Camp Nordland. And in fact, that building still exists today. I have personally been inside that building. You could rent it out if you had a party, you had a party and you wanted to rent out a hall, like a VFW hall, same type of thing. You could rent it from the town. The town owns it, but it originally was the clubhouse for Camp Nordland. And as you if you go around, where the cars are, where the parking was, that is now baseball fields. There's swing sets there. And then off in the woods, basically, if you were the cameraman taking this picture, behind you, there's woods. That's where all the houses and stuff would have been. And there's still ruins to this day down there. Camp Bergwald, I think you guys are more central Jersey for me, but this is right on the border of Bergen County and Morris County, and also Passaic County. This would have been, this is in Riverdale, New Jersey. If anyone is familiar with Route 287, right before you get from 287 south to the interchange with Route 23, on the right-hand side, there is a quarry. That quarry is the property that used to be Camp Bergwald. It is private property. It's fenced off. You cannot go up there. I have been involved in some documentary filming, and back in the day, about 10 years ago, I was up there hiking. I have been in there. There are still ruins there. You cannot go anymore. But just this past summer, I was involved in a documentary film. We got permission to film up there, and I was interviewed up there. We did some filming up there. So I'll give you some information later on. There is a film that should be coming out on Netflix next year, hopefully either Netflix or Amazon Prime, and you should be able to see some footage of what was going on back where Camp Bergwald. Camp Bergwald was not specifically a camp run by the Bund. It was run by the business league, the auxiliary unit, but it still was under the auspices of the Bund. The last camp that was in New Jersey was a camp down near Princeton in a town called Griggstown. This camp was called Camp Willy and Macht, with will and might. And I bring up this one. This is an interesting camp. If you look at this picture, you see the tents. There was no permanent buildings at this camp. It was just like a tent city. But I talked earlier about the boycott and how some German shop owners who necessarily weren't National Socialists would have been driven into the arms of the Bund and joined the Bund for economic reasons. Likewise, you would have had German families that may have been very poor and needed to get their children out of, Yorktown, out of New York City, because they just needed to get them out for the summer and get them out into the country. And this was a very cost-effective way. They could send their children to the Bund camp. They could spend the summer there. It was very, very cheap and something that they could afford. If you look at the picture with the boy all the way on the right, he's barefoot. He has no shoes. And it was a boy that was, he was poor family. So I may be a family. I have a 10-year-old or 12-year-old son. I'm not necessarily a National Socialist, but I really don't have any other economic options to get my children out into the country for the summer. I may send them to the Bund because I can do that fairly cheap. And if he gets some Nazi ideology or lectures in the meantime, then so be it. Don't forget, we look back upon, Nazi Germany and the Holocaust with 2020, hindsight. At the time, the horrors of the Holocaust, the horrors of what happened with World War II, where we're still yet to come, and we didn't really have that knowledge at that time. We talked about the rallies. This happened to be a rally in 1939 in Madison Square Garden. It's one of the predecessor organizations. There's actually been like 4 buildings that were quote unquote Madison Square Garden. It's not the current building, but would have been the building before. But if you look at this picture, it is a packed house. There's about 20 to 25,000 supporters inside for the rally. You can see the banners across the second mezzanine level, very reminiscent of the Sportspalast in Berlin. You would have seen the rallies in Berlin. Only difference is, instead of German banners, you have English banners here, and you can see the Bund banner in the background along with the American flag banners and probably a 50-foot portrait of George Washington, who they claimed was the first American fascist. I don't know why they called him that, but that's what they referred to George Washington as. You would have seen scenes like this, the uniformed stormtroopers marching towards the stage with the banners of the swastika, and the supporters with the Hitler salute, the raised arm salute. And if you look at the poster for this rally, it was billed as a pro-American rally. pro-American. They viewed themselves as a patriotic organization to engage in a fight against communism. While that was going on inside, outside you had about 6,000 counter protesters. You had mounted NYPD riot control units, and protesters. This was again not going unnoticed, not going behind the scenes. This was something that was very much opposed by certain people, and they showed their opposition to it. So I'm going to talk real quick about 3 cases that I talked about in my thesis. My thesis is about the German-American Bund. And as I read about the Bund, a lot of historians came to the conclusion that yes, the Bund were Nazis, yes, the Bund were supportive of Nazi Germany, but they really weren't a threat to the United States. They really posed no national security threat, and they were basically kind of like bumbling idiots that couldn't get out of their own way. And really, the FBI was heavy-handed in dealing with them. The FBI violated their civil rights, and the FBI and American law enforcement were too harsh in their investigation into the Bund that it wasn't warranted. And I looked at it from a law enforcement perspective, and these are the 3 cases that I gave that I said justified what the American law enforcement and FBI looking into the Bund as a national security threat. So the first one is the Rumrich spy ring, 1938. This was the first Nazi spy ring broken inside the United States. The leader of this spy ring was an individual by the name of Dr. Ignaz Greibel. Now, Dr. Greibel was the former national leader of the Friends of the New Germany. So you have an individual who is the national leader of the Friends of the New Germany, which is a national socialist organization from 1933 to 1936. And 2 years later, in 1938, he's the leader of a spy ring that is broken by the FBI inside the United States. Early on in the days of the FBI, they had to work out some of their methodology, but 18 individuals are indicted. They are all told they're going to be put on trial, and they're going to be charged and potentially put into prison. And what do? They say, well, I don't have any reason to stick around. I'm going to flee back to Germany. And 14 of them actually did flee back to Germany with the help of the Bund. You have Bund members who are working in the shipyards. You have Bund members that are working on the German shipping. If I need to flee the country, I don't want to go through customs. I don't want to have to go through the red tape of a passport, but I need to get out of the country. I'm going to use my Bund friends to get into the seaport, get into the ships, and get out of the country undetected. And that's what they did. This spy ring formed the basis for the 1939 film Confessions of a Nazi Spy. It's actually not a bad film if anyone's ever seen it, or if you haven't seen it, go look for it. It is in the public domain. You should be able to find it for free on the internet. It's a pretty good film. It's actually pretty good, and it's based on this case. 1941 is the Duquesne spy ring. It's a little larger. We have 33 spies convicted. To date, it is the largest spy ring ever discovered operating within the United States. And several agents and had been members or involved with the German-American Bund or one of the predecessor organizations. And what this group focused on was not like the James Bond kind of spy, but they focused on individuals that could provide information and sabotage. But what I mean by that is somebody working in the naval shipyard, somebody working for Wright Aeronautics who's working on key military defense contracts, somebody who's working for Alcoa and supplying aluminum for the bombers and that kind of stuff. These are the type of people that they looked for information, they looked for military plans, and they looked for, in the event of war, sabotage. This one's my favorite, 1942 Operation Pastorius. By this point in time, we are at war. We are involved in World War II. And this is an operation devised by an individual by the name of Walter Kappa. Now, Walter Kappa is a longtime Nazi supporter. He is a founding member of the Teutonia Society. He is involved in the Friends of the New Germany. When the German-American Bund comes into existence, he is their propaganda chief. He is in charge of their newspaper. And when the war starts in 1939, like a good German, he returns voluntarily to Germany, and he joins the Abwehr, which is their military intelligence. It's kind of like our CIA. He devises this plan. They train 8 saboteurs. They train 12 saboteurs. Of those 12, 8 are actually selected for the mission. They get 2 Nazi U-boats, and they put 4 saboteurs on each U-boat, and they send the U-boats over to the United States. One lands off the coast of Long Island, one lands off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Of the 12 that they trained, only 2 of them had a military background. Of the 8 that they selected, 7 of the 8, and I'm pretty sure all 8, I just don't have concrete proof about the last one, had been involved in the Bund. So when you look at this, the emphasis was not on a military background of sabotage, but the emphasis of was individuals that had assumed knowledge of assumed knowledge of America, could blend in with American society, but had a Nazi loyalty. And that's what they got from members of the Bund. Very similar to today, you might have a mosque, an Islamic mosque. 99% of that mosque may be law-abiding citizens, but you may have that 1% fringe element that if I'm looking to recruit a terroristic cell, I may go to that group to recruit my fanatical members, and you have the same pool of potential saboteurs and spies in the German-American Bund back in the 30s and 40s. So if anyone's familiar with our coastal defenses, our civil defense at this time, basically our coastal defenses, consisted of like an 18-year-old guy who walked around on the beach with a billy club and a flashlight, walking back and forth between Coast Guard stations. And that's exactly what happened to this 18-year-old by the name of John Cullen. He's walking about 2:30 in the morning. This little dinghy comes ashore with 4 saboteurs. The top 4 to be exact, George, John, Dash, Berger, Kieran, and Heinrich, they are the ones that land on Long Island. The bottom 4 land in Jacksonville. He comes across them as they're coming on to shore, 2 o'clock in the morning. All he has is a billy club and a flashlight. These 4 guys want to kill him. George Dash, who's the leader of the group, says, we're not going to kill him. He's not going to tell anyone. He kind of does like a Jedi mind trick. He says, you're not going to tell anyone. You're not going to say anything. And what's this 18-year-old kid do? He's surrounded by 4 German spies. He says, sure, no, I'm not going to tell anyone. No problem. So they let him leave. He beats feet back to the Coast Guard station to report what he's found a mile away or so. These 4 individuals beat feet into town, catch the 4:35 a.m. train into New York City, and they're into the city. By the time, the authorities really realize what's going on, they're already blended into the city and we don't know where they are. What George Dash does is he goes to his hotel room and he calls up the FBI and he basically says, my name is George Dash, I'm a Nazi spy, I got dropped off in a German submarine and I want to turn us in. And the FBI kind of thought he was a quack and really didn't give him a second thought and kind of hung up on him. So the next day, George Dash goes down to Washington, D.C., gets on a train, goes down to Washington, D.C., goes to the FBI headquarters, and basically says, I want to turn my group in. This is what's going on. So they actually interview him. They listen to him. They find out that these 2 saboteur missions were devised, and they find the buried saboteur equipment. They end up arresting all 8 individuals, and they foil this operation. What does J. Edgar Hoover do? He blasted in the press as far as this great investigation that the FBI did this great job. The G-men foiled this saboteur mission when in fact George Dash turned them in and was hung up on it first. They didn't even believe him at first. So they end up putting these guys on trial. And the first 2 individuals, George Dash and Peter Bergen, are given life sentences because what George Dash said was, I was stuck in Nazi Germany. It was wartime. I wanted to get back to the United States. I had no other option to get back to the United States other than to participate in this mission. As soon as I got on shore, I didn't kill that individual. I saved his life. And the second I got to New York City, I called and tried to turn ourselves in, which he eventually did. So they gave him life in prison. The other 6 individuals were electrocuted by the electric chair. They were executed. The first 2 that were given life sentences eventually were commuted after the war, shipped back to Germany, deported. I don't know what happened to them. They blended into history, and I don't know what became of them. But this is a very interesting story, and it kind of shows, what could have been. These individuals were coming back to do sabotage, to do, strike inside the United States, and they definitely could have had they not been foiled by their leader. If anyone's interested in reading more about this, there's a really good book by the name of Saboteurs. It's about this Operation Pastorius, and it's a really good read. I highly recommend it. So that's pretty much a background of the Bund. As far as the downfall of the Bund is the Bundesführer Fritz Kuhn. He does not get arrested for anything Bund related. He has a mistress, and a la Al Capone, getting arrested and taken down for tax evasion. He had Fritz Kuhn has a mistress in Los Angeles. He lives in New York City. He uses Bund funds to move his mistress from Los Angeles to New York City. Unbeknown to him, the FBI were tapping his phones, were tapping his hotel rooms, and they realized that he is using Bund funds for personal use. That technically is embezzlement. So they come in and the FBI arrests him for embezzlement, puts him into Sing Sing, and he kind of is taken out of the picture as far as the Bund's concerned. The second in command is a guy by the name of Wilhelm Gerhard Wilhelm Kunz. He's actually from New Milford, New Jersey, in Bergen County. And he ends up taking over as the Bund is kind of on its downfall. We're now entering World War II. It's really getting cracked down. The camps are getting raided. The units are getting shut down. He tries to flee to Mexico. He's arrested. And in his possessions is a little black book with individuals listed as Nazi contact men or agents, including a Carl Shiphorst from Glen Rock, New Jersey. So that was the beginning of his the FBI focusing on Carl Shiphorst. So I'm going to play a real quick video here for you. This is just going to be a little visual of what we talked about as far as the history, and then we'll go on to Carl Shiphorst, his story.
In the 30s.
Can you hear the audio?
Columns keeping cadence with their European counterparts. Here in the United States, the German-American Bund openly imitates the strut and slogans of the Nazi stormtroops. In the march of the totalitarians, in the spread of fascism.
They tried it here in America, took American children and tried to instill the same evil spirit of fascism here, with brazen contempt as they flaunted their so-called superior system in our very faces, as they practiced for the day when they would rule America, tried to break down the democratic ideals of the youth of our nation, where children of all races can meet on common ground, inspired by a...
And where do you think this is? Right in Madison Square Garden, USA.
This would have been the rally in Madison Square Garden that we showed the picture earlier.
And this is Fritz Kuhn, leader of the German-American Bund, hiding behind the American flag, but taking his orders from Berlin and copying the methods of Berlin.
So there you have a protester that rushed the stage, and you have the uniformed stormtroopers basically taking him out. By the time he was off the stage, his pants had been ripped off, and he was beaten up pretty good. This would have been Camp Nordland. There's no more audio. It's silent, so I'm going to talk over it. This would have been Camp Nordland up in Andover, the largest camp. Where those cars are parked are now baseball fields and a hockey rink and swing sets. Again, that clubhouse is still there. This would have been a parade in Camp Nordland, not this one, but the very next parade, which is in color, would have been a parade celebrating, this would have been a couple days after the fall of France in Nazi Germany, or in France and Europe. Would have been 1940s, the fall of France, and this was a parade celebrating that German victory in Europe here in New Jersey. This would have been a couple days after, once they got the news of the fall of France. Back in those woods back there is where the houses were. Again, if you have any desire to go up hiking, you can still walk around there and see some of the ruins of the. You are allowed in there. It is public property, and you can walk around in there. This would have been some of the youth organization video, and in addition to camping and just common festivities that you would do at any summer camp, you would have had rallies and speeches and of the like there, something similar like this, which would have garnered a large crowd. I think what struck me the most was just how wide open this was, and myself personally never hearing about this growing up. I never heard about it in school. I never heard about it in college. It wasn't until I started doing my research for my master's degree that I even learned about this organization. I would say in the last 10 years, I have seen some documentaries on History Channel and what have you, and it has kind of morphed into the public domain. But really, this is something that we kind of forgot about for 50 years and really didn't hear about in books or anything like that. So Carl Shiphorse, like I said, he was found in the book as a contact man. So the FBI began an investigation into him specifically. And I wrote away to the National Archives. About 14 months later, I obtained a copy of the investigative file, and being the good detective I am, I kind of delved into it and looked at what they did, and then I tried to follow up on the information that they had and continue the investigation myself. So this is all information taken right from their file. Carl was born in Germany in 1891. Born in Bremerhaven, and he was married to Barbara Worth. They were married on July 2nd, 1915, and he did serve in the German army during World War I. Here's a photograph that I got from his grandson. I was able to speak with his grandson and interview his grandson. They provided the photos that you're going to see. He was there's his pedigree information. He lived at 54 Grandview Place in Glen Rock. Prior to that, he lived in Ridgewood, New Jersey, which is right next door to Glen Rock, and he was a painter contractor by trade. Very innocuous profession. He didn't work in like a shipyard or anything like that, but he would have been the leader of the Bergen County unit. He would have been in charge of recruiting individuals to the unit, maybe recruiting individuals for sabotage or espionage, and also would have been involved in handing out propaganda. So I don't assume any of you guys or girls live in Glen Rock or are very familiar with Glen Rock, but there is a Grandview Ave in Glen Rock. And for the longest time while I was doing this investigation, I believe that Grandview Ave was Grandview Place where he lived which was listed in the FBI investigation. And I just figured place and Ave was a typo, it happens all the time. But then we were able to get an old tax map from the 1930s of Glen Rock, and we found an actual Grandview Place did exist in Glen Rock in the 1930s. And if I look at this map and overlay it on a map of Glen Rock today, Grandview Place is a dead end here, but it continues off to the left and bends around and goes down to where it says Albemarle Place, and that's now one road. That road is called Pineland Road. It still exists today. And I don't know if you can see my cursor moving. Can you see my cursor moving? Okay, so the cursor right here is about where Carl lived, right above the W in Grandview Place. Well, right here today in Glen Rock is the Glen Rock Jewish Center, which I think is a very fitting and ironic thing, is that they built the Glen Rock Jewish Center basically in Carl Shiphorse's backyard. But the house numbers have changed. When the street names changed to Pineland, the house numbers changed, but we've been able to kind of narrow down the house that Carl Shiphorse lived in. And interestingly enough, the house that we think he lived in is now occupied by a police captain from another town. I know who he is, and I talked to him about this, and I talked to him about this, that he may live in the house, and he actually said to me, he goes, it's funny you mentioned that. They were doing some renovations in the house a couple years ago, and when they opened up a wall, they found a bottle of whiskey that was wrapped in newspaper, and the newspaper happened to be a German newspaper. So I think that's pretty good evidence that he probably lives in the house where this guy lived in, and I told him we're going to have to do some metal detecting in his backyard or something, because there could be some cool stuff over there. But these are some pictures of Carl Shiphorse, the businessman. This is his company and his workforce. And that, this is, again, stuff supplied by the family. So Carl's wife, Barbara, was also born in Germany, 1894. She was born in Saarbrücken, Germany. And she had a brother, Erwin, who lived in Midland Park, New Jersey, which is a couple towns away from Glen Rock, also in Bergen County, if you're not familiar with it. She was a housewife. There's a picture of her. She was not an official member of the Bund, but she definitely was supportive of it and attended meetings with her husband. They had one daughter. It was not their daughter. She was legally adopted by the Shiphorse when she was 18 months old. Her name was Ursula, and she was actually born in the United States in 1929. So she was an American citizen and was not born in Germany. And there are some pictures of the Shiphorse family I obtained from Ursula's son, who provided these photos for me. So Carl came to the United States in 1924, so he came after World War I. And that's kind of important. I've kind of noticed in my research that not as a hard, fast rule, but for the most part, German immigrants that came over prior to World War I, for the most part, had nothing to do with the Bund, were not National Socialist supporters, and really had nothing to do with what was going on in Nazi Germany. Germans that immigrated to the United States after World War I, who went through the defeat of World War I, who went through the myth that they were told that they were stabbed in the back, the Red Revolution of 1918, the economic hardships, the individuals that went through that were more likely to be involved in the Bund and to become ardent nationalists and support National Socialism. But anyway, Carl came over in January 24, and Barbara followed about 10 months after in October. By early 1937, Carl has joined the Bund. He joins the Bund out of Hackensack, which is the county seat for Bergen County. Very enthusiastic, is soliciting other members. And in the same year, July of 1937, Camp Nordland, again, the largest camp in the United States, opens in Andover, New Jersey. Carl happens to be a founding executive member of the camp and on the board of directors for the camp. So by November of 1937, the FBI agents are investigating Nazi Bund camps, and they actually interview Carl because he is involved with the camp in Andover. And he basically admits his membership in the Bund and stated that he is very much opposed to communism, which was a very, again, nothing for him to be hiding. He doesn't feel he's doing anything wrong, and he is a good patriotic American as well as anti-communist. The Bund in Bergen County continues. By the spring of 1939, Carl is no longer just a member of the unit, but he is now the leader of the Bergen County unit. And just something that was taken out of the FBI file, an individual basically contacted the FBI as a tip to say, hey, this guy is very ardent. He's always trying to get people to join, and he's very active in the Bund. The FBI's own records indicate that their surveillance for 1940, his vehicle was observed at Camp Nordland on at least 5 or 6 occasions, weekends up at Camp Andover. So again, not only was he the leader of the Bergen County unit, not only was he involved in the executive board of the camp, he was also very much involved in attending the camp and going to the camp. By 1940, we are not at war yet, but Europe is at war. It may not be something that he wants to advertise very much. So there is the local newspaper exposes him as being involved in the Bund camp, but now he is now trying to backtrack a little bit. He is now denying that he owns a house there, although it was proven later on that he was very much involved. Also, another tip from a neighbor, which was never verified, but she claimed that there were uniforms, German uniforms, and guns that were stored in his basement. And again, this time, there were fifth column fears. There was, the army from within, fears of an uprising were very much in the press, and this would have been something they would have been concerned about. So the Bund billed themselves as a very patriotic, pro-American organization. And I'd like to talk about this real quick to just kind of give a juxtaposition of that claim. The German American Bund was a national organization, and as a national organization, they had a national convention every year. And this one in 1940 happened to be in Chicago. Carl Shiphorst, as a leader for the Bergen County unit, attends. And while he's there, he demands an explanation for why there is so much English being spoken at the camps by the children. And he actually proposes physical punishment for any children, including his own, who are caught speaking English rather than German in the summer camps. And it was very interesting that here you have an organization that is billed as a pro-American patriotic organization, yet they are proposing physical punishment for children who are caught speaking English at their camps. Take of that what you will, but I found it very interesting. The one hand they're saying they're pro-American, on the other hand, I'm going to physically punish children for speaking English. So in January of 1941, Carl and 8 other camp leaders are arrested and convicted by the New Jersey State Police for inciting racial hatred. That was the law, inciting racial hatred, and it's basically for racial hatred speeches that they gave at Camp Nordland. They were arrested, convicted, and then they out on bail while it was under appeal. So as 1941 continues, by April, Camp Nordland is raided by the Sussex County Sheriff, and it results in the closure and confiscation and the arrest of the key leaders, which we just talked about. Just a quick side note, the Sussex County Sheriff was later arrested by the FBI for running moonshine stills in Sussex County. By August 1941, the FBI has now confirmed that Carl Shiphorse is a bungalow owner at Camp Nordland due to records, so he is very much involved with the camp, and he is again interviewed in his home by FBI agents. So the arrest and conviction was out on appeal for the full year of 1941. They were arrested in January. By December 5th, the racial hatred law is actually overturned. The conviction is overturned by the New Jersey Supreme Court, and they basically say that this is in violation of our freedom of speech. You may not agree with what I have to say. You may not like what I have to say, but as long as I'm not causing bodily injury, you know, the old yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, it is not against the law for me to espouse my views. No matter how much you don't like my views, I still have that right as an American to say what I believe. And they overturned the convictions. The convictions were thrown out, and the racial hatred law that was on the books was actually deemed unconstitutional. So at this point in time, you might be saying, as I was saying, how does the FBI, how does the government go against these people that may be supporting Nazi Germany, that may be involved in sabotage, that may be involved in subversive actions? How do we go about them? What is our legal recourse against this group? And there were a couple things they could do. First was the Dees Commission, or Dies Commission, however you pronounce it. That would have been the House Un-Americans Committee. And that later morphed into what became the McCarthy hearings in the 1950s, which we're all familiar with. That was basically congressional hearings, interviewing individuals and what their actions were. Then you had violation of the Selective Service Act. If I have to register for the draft, if I get called into the draft and I refuse to fight, I'm in violation of the Selective Service Act. So Bund members who refused to report for the draft were targeted that way. Then you have FARA. FARA is the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and this is a law that is still in the books today. You may have heard of it a couple years ago. Trump appointed Flynn as his defense secretary, and he ran into some problems because he did some work with some foreign agents, and he never declared this, and they got him in trouble. He ran afoul of the FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Basically, what this act says is that if you're an agent for another country or a foreign government, or if you're a spy, that you have to register with the United States government. And people always get a chuckle out of that. Why would a spy register with the government that they're spying on? And it's not that simple. Basically, you have to have a law in the book in order to break that law. So they have to list that, hey, you cannot be a spy and work in our country unless you let us know that you're working in our country. But there's also a legitimate reason for it as well. OPEC, for instance, is oil-producing countries to the Middle East. If I work for OPEC, I am working for a foreign government. I need to register with the United States that I am working for an entity that has interest in a foreign government. So that's basically what it is. It's just a way for the United States government to keep track of who's working and in what capacity for foreign agencies. And then the final one, if none of that worked and they couldn't get them out that way, the final thing they would do is they would basically declare their oath of allegiance, which you would take when you became a citizen. They would void your citizenship by saying that their oath of allegiance was invalid, because when you take your oath of allegiance, you entirely renounce all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign state, particularly Germany, and I take this obligation freely and without any mental reservation. And what the government argued was, if you are supporting Nazi Germany, if you are handing out literature, if you're handing out propaganda, if you are engaging in this type of behavior, although those actions may not be illegal, you are taking your oath of allegiance with a mental reservation, and therefore your oath is invalid. And if your oath is invalid, therefore your citizenship is invalid. And they would basically use this to deport individuals that they couldn't arrest. So the FBI continues to look into Carl Shiphorse as the leader of Bergen County. And on January 5th, 1942, FBI agents, along with the Glen Rock police chief, proceed to the Ship Horse home, and they interview him and search him. I was able to go back into our police archives for the Glen Rock Police Department, and I actually got our blotter book for that day, and I was able to find the top blotter entry, 11 a.m. Mosley, FBI agent, Newark, requested 2 men assist him at 2 p.m. today with Chief and Mulqueen on a detail at the Ship Horse residence, Grandview Place. So it was really neat for me as a Glen Rock police officer to look at the FBI file, see that the FBI was going on this date into Glen Rock, and then look at the Glen Rock police blotter and match that up. It was just really neat to make that connection and find that handwritten blotter entry in our local police blotter book. So this is the evidence that resulted from that search of the household. They got a lot of Bund material, a lot of propaganda. They got Carl's diary. They got his Bund songbook, because who doesn't love to sing Nazi songs? They had a German American Bund membership card. If you look at the book on the bottom right, this would have been what I had talked about, like that frequent shopper book. That if you're a Bund member and you visit Bund stores, you can get economic benefits. If you visit me 10 times, you get something for free. That was kind of what that was. They had an ink stamp with the German American Bund and the Bergen County unit with the swastika at the center, and they had a parking permit for Camp Nordland. That's the evidence they seize. Nothing. If you don't have to be a police officer to know that this is not damning evidence. However, despite that, the Department of Justice classifies Carl Shiphorst in Group A. And Group A are individuals believed to be the most dangerous and who should be interned in the event of war. However, the evidence gathered is not sufficient to establish charges, and they have to keep looking. So they're on one hand, they're saying this guy is our #1 target, but you don't have enough evidence at this point. So the FBI continue. They interview Carl Shiphorst. Shiphorst says, I don't care who won the war. I'm just not going to fight against Nazi Germany. So he hasn't been drafted yet, but if he gets drafted, he could be in violation of the Civil Service Act. He did not think the Bund was un-American, and he still would be a member if it was still in existence. At this point in time, the Bund is basically shut down once we enter the war. And he felt that German Americans were discriminated against and that he lost customers because he was a member of the Bund. He stated that he owned a Bund uniform and membership pin, but was asked to turn them in because he had served in the German army in World War I. I don't know why he said that. I've never heard that in any other book. I always throw that out my lectures because maybe someday, one day, somebody will have an insight of why he said that to the FBI, but I don't really know. Many members served in World War I and never had to turn in their Bund uniforms. And he also claimed that he threw many of his Bund items into the bottom of the Hudson River off of Fort Lee by the George Washington Bridge. So if anyone has scuba gear and they want to go for a swim, they might be able to find some Bund relics in the Hudson River. So by September 1942, he's still free. There's still no case against him, but his wife basically sees the writing on the wall. They realize the FBI is not going to stop it. This is not going to end. So she calls up the FBI and she says, I'm going to give a voluntary statement and I'm going to voluntarily have my U.S. citizenship revoked. My only request is that you keep our family together. Don't split us up. Keep my husband, my wife, the husband, the wife, and Ursula together as you deport us. And basically Hoover hears this and he says, absolutely, rubber stamp it, get it through. We don't have a case against this family, this guy, so let's just get him out of here. They basically issue a presidential warrant, and he is included in the big, large case against Germans for the Oath of Allegiance. And this is an actual copy of the presidential warrant against Carl Shiphorst. So February now of 1943, we're into the 1943 now. The Shiphorst family is arrested at their home in Glen Rock. They are brought by the Glen Rock Police and the FBI, first to Ridgewood Police Department, probably for processing, and then to Ellis Island. A lot of people don't realize that Ellis Island during this time was not someplace you could visit and look at, see. It was closed to the public, and it was actually an internment camp where they housed enemy aliens. And again, I did a deep dive into our blotter books, and I was able to find this blotter entry. At the bottom, you can see Chief and FBI agent picked up the Shiphorst family, father, mother, and daughter. They were sent to Ellis Island. And again, it was very cool for me from a personal level to be able to put our Glen Rock archives and the FBI file together that way. So they go in front of the enemy alien hearing board, and they basically both say, we're not going to fight this, just keep us together as a family. And they are taken to Ellis Island and eventually brought down, again, they're arrested in February of 43. March of 43, they're still interned in Ellis Island, and by April 1943, the internment order is issued, and it takes all the way to July 1943 for them to be sent to Crystal City, Texas, to the detention station in Crystal City, Texas, where they were housed until they were deported. Now, real quick, this is a photograph of Christmas dinner from 1946 on Ellis Island. And again, I found it very interesting. Ellis Island, symbol of welcoming people to the United States, was basically a prison camp for enemy aliens during World War II and even after World War II. A lot of people don't realize, we all hear about the Japanese Americans internment during World War II. Germans were interned as well, a much lower number I'll talk about in a second, but this happened as well. Crystal City, they're sent there in July of 1943. And like I said, the Japanese Americans, you had about 110 to 120,000 Japanese American interned, and you had about 12,000 Germans interned during World War II. This is a map of the United States. The red labels are major internment facilities, and the blue ones are minor internment facilities. Most of these would have been government facilities, such as an army barracks or forts or something like that. But again, you have some place like Ellis Island, which was, a big place. So again, 43 is when they are first surrender, and now we're into February 1944. The Shiphorse family finally leaves the United States along the SS Gripsholm. There's a picture of the ship right there. It's a diplomatic ship, and they're repatriated to Lisbon, Portugal. Now, 1944, we are still at war. The war is still raging in Germany and Europe. They cannot go directly to Germany. There's no way to do that. So they are dumped in Portugal, which is a neutral country, and they are left on their own to go back to to find their way back to Germany during World War II, which I don't know how they did it, but they did it, and it was, it must have been some journey for them to go through the lines and get back to Germany. But Crystal City, Texas has a website that talks about their history. And I found it very interesting. On this website, there are, some pictures from the camp and some documentation from the camp. There must have been thousands of deportees that went through Crystal City, Texas. And on their website, they just picked a random list from one of the deportee shipments, which happened to be on February 12th, 1944 at 3:30 a.m. And it lists all the individuals that were on this deportee list. And they just gave a small snapshot of that list that was, as you can see here, up until at least 512 individuals, and even higher because it's alphabetical. We're only at S. But I was amazed to see that the example that they gave on their website had right in the middle, smack dab, Carl Shiphorse, Barbara Shiphorse, and Ursula Shiphorse. I don't know what the odds are that the website for Crystal City happens to have an example of a deportation list, and it happens to be the individual that I'm investigating, but there he is right there on their website. And what I like to point out here is, here's Ursula. Ursula is 14 years old. 14-year-old female, 1944, being shipped back to war-torn, raging Europe, who's lived her whole life in the United States. What that must have been for her, I cannot imagine. So, was he a spy? No, not in a James Bond sense of the word, but he was a spy in convenience. He was typical of those recruited. The Norden bomb site is a great example. The Norden bomb site was developed partly by Wright Aeronautics. It was developed here in Passaic County and Bergen County. And what happened is the Norden bomb site, the plans were actually stolen by a German-American Bund member who worked for Norden, for Wright Aeronautics. And what this individual did is every day he went to work, he would memorize a small portion of the blueprints. He would come home from work, he would write down the part that he memorized. The next day he would go back to work, memorize another portion of it, come back, write down the next portion of it. And in this way, by memorizing little pieces of the plans, he was able to recreate the plans, and through the Bund was able to get those plans back to Nazi Germany. Norden bomb site was very high tech for the time being. It was a very important piece of military technology that helped us win the war, and that was stolen and given to Nazi Germany. Luckily for us, the Germans looked at it, basically said, our stuff's just as good, and they didn't really utilize it, but that was something that was stolen in this manner. So that used to be the end of the story until I tracked down the German, the grandson of this Karl Schipphorst, Ursula's son. And once I tracked him down, he was able to fill in the rest of the story for me. Basically what happens, the family returned from Portugal. They returned to Dresden, Germany. Anyone's familiar with Dresden during World War II? It is carpet bombed by the Allies, firebombed. There's a picture of it down there. He said that his mother told him she hated Germany. When the bombers were flying overhead, she was forced to play the violin as a distraction. She absolutely hated Germany. I don't blame her. 14 years old, live in America, and you get thrusted into that situation. After the war, she works for the U.S. Army as a translator, and she gets so fed up with Germany that she threatens to marry a GI in order to return to the United States. It is at this point in time that the Schipphorst explained to her and let her know that she is in fact adopted. She is in fact an American citizen, and there's no need to marry a GI in order to return to the United States. Her uncle still lives in Midland Park, and if you look at this shipping manifest from April 1947, Ursula Schipphorst is now 18 years old, and she returns to Midland Park, New Jersey. What's interesting about this shipping manifest is these are passengers traveling under United States Presidential Directive of December 2nd, 1945. And what that directive was the American government's commitment to help individuals that were displaced by World War II. It was intended for people that may have been taken by the Germans to a concentration camp, taken out of their hometown or their home country, and this was a way to assist individuals that were now freed from the concentration camp and no longer able, they did not have the means to return to their homes. The U.S. government would assist them in that. Ursula was a U.S. citizen, was displaced from the United States during the war because of her family's deportation, so the U.S. government paid for her journey back to the United States to repatriate her. Ursula does return to the United States. She changes her name, which is why I never could find her. She marries a U.S. Air Force serviceman anyway. She lives in Hawthorne, New Jersey, in Passaic County, which is right next to Glen Rock. She has kids. And her son he didn't even know his mother spoke German until a family trip to Germany when he was like in high school. And so that was a shock to him when he learned about it. That oath of allegiance case that Karl Schipphorst had his citizenship stripped eventually went to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1949. It was called the Great Sedition Trial. That conviction was overturned. Karl Schipphorst actually was reinstated. His citizenship was reinstated, and he was allowed to return to the United States in the 1950s or 60s. He actually came back to Hawthorne, New Jersey, lived out his years with his daughter in Hawthorne, and he is buried in Paterson, New Jersey. That is pretty much my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. I do have a couple little tales that I can tell if anyone wants to hear them. But I know we're about an hour and 10 minutes in. If you want, or an hour in, if you want to ask any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And then if there's no questions, I'll tell my little war stories, and we can go on from there.
All right.
I have a question.
Yeah, please unmute yourselves. Let me just interrupt for a second, John. So anybody who has a question, don't forget to unmute yourselves, and we'll take these one at a time. Go ahead, John.
Okay, my question is, I've spoken to people who have been interrogated during the war, and the Germans knew more about him, like this one fella knew more about his family than he did. And there are so many instances. Is the Bund the way that they got that military intelligence?
That's a great question, and it's actually one of my war stories, so I'm going to give you that story now. So yeah, that would have been one of the ways that they would have gotten information. And again, people look at this, and when you think, when most people think spy, they think James Bond, this military spy that's secreted into the country and he wreaks havoc, whatever. But military information can be just as devastating or just as important to an enemy nation. And one of the things would do, let's say, this was an example that was given in a book as what the Bund would do. Shortwave radios were available, and with a shortwave radio, you could transmit across the ocean. So you also could transmit through embassies and that kind of stuff too, but you could transmit across the ocean. And one thing that the Bund would do is, let's say you're small, let's say, John Smith is Air Force pilot or Army Air Corps pilot in Germany. He gets shot down. He's taken POW. Well, that information might be reported in the local, the local Gazette, the local newspaper. It might say, John Smith was shot down over Nazi Germany. He was taken capture. His mother, Sally, his father, Herbert, and his sister, Jane, are very, very worried about him. And they might give some just some basic information about the family. Well, that information could be sent back to Nazi Germany about the family. And then imagine yourself as a POW and you're being interrogated in a foreign country. And all of a sudden your interrogator is saying, listen, John, your mother, Sally, is very worried about you. And your sister, Jane, is very worried about you. All this personal information is now playing with your psychological well-being. And it may be enough that you're going to break that particular POW, and it could just be that little kernel of information that could be very important in a military interrogation. So yes, it may be somebody that they know from the community. Maybe it's not listed in the paper, but this individual has lived in the community, knows this individual, and can pass information along for somebody who is, John Smith was deployed with the, First Armada, whatever, something like that. That information could very much was sent back to Germany and was a very good source for the Bund. So I'm thank you for that question. It's an excellent question.
Jim, is there any evidence of any other spies ever trying to make it from Germany over to America?
Absolutely, yeah. So the Operation Pistorius one with the submarines, that was not the only one that occurred in that fashion. Later on in the war, I believe it would have been 44 or 45, so it's kind of a Hail Mary. It's towards the end of the war. There's an individual by the name of, it's slipping me right now. There's a book called, it's either Agent 196 or 169, something like that. There's a book called Agent 196, I believe it is. He's a German individual with an American, believe it or not, American individual who was in Germany for some reason. These two are dumped off of the coast of Maine. And they come ashore on Maine and come into the United States, and they have a similar mission of information and sabotage and what have you. They are eventually captured and rounded up and arrested, and it's a very good story. So yeah, that absolutely happened. They had spies like that. You had a lot of Bund members would have been asked to do stuff. A lot of times you would, when the war started, you might have had German Americans that were in Germany visiting family, and the Germans would have known this. So there's another book about spies. I actually have it in the room. I can go grab it real quick. The name escapes me right now, but this is an individual that was in Germany on vacation. We were not at war yet, but the Germans were. And the German Abwehr knew that he lived in the United States, knew that he had family in Nazi Germany, and basically pressured him and said, they took him off the streets and said, you are going to be a spy for us. You are going to work for us, or your family is going to suffer here in Germany. And he was forced to do this work. What he ends up doing is contacting the FBI, contacting the US government, telling them what happened was, and they basically turned him as a double agent. And this double agent is the FBI is able to feed him false information, which is radioed back to the Germans, and they're able to actually feed information that they wanted to back to Germany. If anyone's interested, I can grab that book before the end of the Zoom and give you the title of that book. But that was another very good book about this whole spy network that happened in the area.
And is there any evidence that any acts of sabotage actually occurred?
I don't have any specific evidence. There was the Hercules powder plant, which was in view of, there was like an ammunition depot that had a big explosion. There's some suspicions that the Bund was involved in that, but there's no direct evidence about that. That happened to be some of the camps, like the Camp Nordland was very close to Picatinny Arsenal, which they suggested may have been on purpose, that they were spying on the Picatinny Arsenal. But as far as like an out and out, yeah, this incident happened and it's definitely the Bund, I don't have any specific information about anything like that.
Okay, all right. Any other questions before we wrap this up? We'll have one
I
more.
think John Kimball raised his hand.
Yeah, I have a brief question. Great research
Thank
in
you.
your project. The question is, I was really struck by the children marching, the Bun video, and I don't know if that was a selection of different videos spliced together. I was curious if the children marching specifically was a specific video that you came across, because it
would have been video from the National Archives. Some of which is available on the National Archives. Do have a YouTube channel, and some of the Bun videos are on the National Archives channel on YouTube, so you can see some of them. The one that you're particularly talking about, I believe I got from a website called Footage Farm. Don't quote me on that one. Basically, I do have it written down somewhere. I just don't have it in front of me right now. But basically, it's like a stock footage company that will sell it to documentaries, that kind of stuff. So that's where I got it from for educational purposes. But there are, if you look up Bun video, there are several Bun videos out on the internet that you can look. In fact, if you look up A Night in the Garden, there is a digitally remastered version, a short film. It's about 16, 17 minutes long, about that rally in Madison Square Garden. It actually won an Academy Award last year. It's on YouTube. It's called A Night in the Garden. It's a much better quality than the video that I have off of the archives. They digitally remastered it, put some music behind it, put some audio behind it. It's really well done. Again, only 16 minutes. Take a look at it tonight. It's really good.
perfect. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all for attending. Jim, I'm going to send you an email. We have a small honorarium to send you, and I want to thank you, but I'll be in touch afterwards. Our next Zoom meeting will be December 1st. It's in 2 weeks. The author, Boomhauer, is going to talk about Pingree's own Richard Tregaskis, who was a war correspondent who later was, well, he lived through the war. He was later found dead in Hawaii, but he's written several books that were turned, or at least one book that was turned into a movie, and it should be very interesting. So December 1st, I'll send out a link for that. So thank you all for coming. I'm going to disconnect now, and we'll be in touch.
Richard, just real quick.
Yep.
I just put up, just in case anyone wants my contact info, I put my contact info up there. And feel free to write that down. And thank you very much for having me. I really enjoy speaking about this. One of the things that I like getting back from this is stories that people have. So if anyone has anything that they think might be pertinent to my research, or somebody that they know that I could speak to, please feel free to reach out to me. Because like I said, this is an ongoing project for me. I am currently writing a book about Carl Shiphorse and the investigation, and how it kind of, this hyper local story tells the story on a national level. So it is ongoing for me, and I'd be happy to hear from anyone who was here tonight.
Well, Jim, one last quick thing. On one of the blurbs online that I read about Camp Bergland, I think it was, they said spies used that area for surveillance. Do you have any record or evidence of that? That higher altitude.
Yeah, so Camp Bergwald is in the mountains. I've been up there hiking. You do have a visual of New York City, but nothing that would be like a tactical advantage. There's no key military installation nearby that they could do surveillance on. I think probably what they would have been referring to more would have been Camp Nordland in Andover, which was in close proximity to the Picatinny Arsenal and to the Hercules powder plant, ammunition plant. That would have been more of a military defense installation that they would have been able to get some surveillance on. And I did hear that was, suggested that they were doing some, the proximity to those two military installations would have been beneficial for the camp to be located where it was.
Okay, very good.
Whether it was a direct overview and binocular surveillance, I don't think so, but just being in the same area.
All right, very good. Well, again, thank you for a great presentation, and I look
Thank you very much.
I'll be in touch with you shortly, Jim.
Thank you very much.
All right, good night all. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good night, happy Thanksgiving.
Stop recording.